His methods were a little crude. His response to our training and indoctrination have been remarkable.
James Bond looked smooth, sharp, and completely in control. In From Russia with Love, that image became even bigger. The film gave audiences suspense, danger, glamour, and one of the most unforgettable versions of 007 ever seen on screen. But behind the stylish scenes, secret missions, and deadly charm, there is a side of this movie most people never hear about. The real story is full of strange choices, hidden drama, last-minute changes, and details that still catch fans off guard. Some are clever, some are messy, and some are almost too wild to believe. From Russia with Love helped make Bond a legend, but what happened around it is just as fascinating. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind it. Bond before the legend. Before. From Russia with Love became one of the most admired Bond films. James Bond already existed on the page as Ian Fleming's creation. Fleming created him in 1952, and Bond first appeared in novels and short stories that introduced a British secret agent with style and nerve. On the page, Bond was tall, athletic, handsome, and usually written as a man in his 30s or 40s. He drank, smoked, gambled, loved cars, and had a weakness for women. He was also deadly when the job called for it. He could shoot, fight, ski, swim, and keep moving under pressure. Bond did not waste time feeling sorry for people he had to kill. He usually did it under orders or in self-defense. That harder side mattered because it shaped the version audiences first met in theaters. But Bond did not begin in movies with Sean Connery. The first screen Bond was Barry Nelson in a 1954 television adaptation of Casino Royale. Then came the bigger shift. In 1961, Eon Productions started work on Dr. No, based on Fleming's 1958 novel. That move changed everything. It launched the film series that would grow into one of the most famous franchises in movie history. Later, Bond's film image would change in some ways, but the roots were already there. He was meant to be charming, dangerous, and just a little hard to trust. That mix matters, because by the time From Russia with Love arrived in 1963, Bond was no longer just a thriller character. He was turning into a screen myth, and the people making the films knew they were handling something much bigger. The man who became 007. The next big question was simple. Who could actually play Bond? The producers looked at polished English stars and familiar names. Cary Grant, David Niven, Trevor Howard, and James Mason were all part of the wider talk. Patrick McGoohan and James Fox were ruled out because they would not have been comfortable with the sexual side of the role. Roger Moore was also in the picture for a time, but he was seen as too young and too neat. Harry Saltzman wanted an actor who was not already fixed in the public mind. Albert Broccoli kept thinking about Sean Connery, an actor he had met before. Broccoli remembered a handsome and likable man with height, strength, and just enough danger in his smile. Donna Broccoli pushed even harder after seeing Connery and Darby O'Gill and The Little People, and bluntly said, "He's our Bond." Saltzman reached out, and the meeting had drama. Connery did not want to work for a weak fee, and made that very clear. In the end, they came to terms. There was still one major problem left. Ian Fleming did not like the choice. He thought Connery was too rough, too unrefined, and too unlike the Bond he had imagined. He even called him an overgrown stuntman. Once again, a woman helped change Bond history. Fleming's girlfriend, Blanche Blackwell, told him Connery had the right appeal. After Dr. No premiered, Fleming changed his mind. He later even gave Bond Scottish ancestry in the books. That says a lot. The actor he first doubted ended up changing the character itself. And that was before From Russia with Love arrived and pushed Connery's Bond image even further. Sean Connery, before the suits and swagger. Sean Connery did not come from anything like Bond's world. He was born on August 25, 1930, at the Royal Maternity Hospital in Edinburgh, Scotland. He had Scottish and Irish roots and grew up modestly. As a boy, he was called Tommy. Later, because of an Irish childhood friend named Seamus, people began calling him Sean, and that name stayed. He worked hard from an early age. One of his first jobs was as a milkman in Edinburgh. At 16, he joined the Royal Navy and later trained in Portsmouth. During that period, he got 2 tattoos. One read Mum and Dad, and the other said Scotland Forever. They reflected loyalties he kept for life. He was discharged from the Navy at 19 because of a duodenal ulcer, then went back to ordinary jobs. He worked as a lorry driver, a lifeguard, a laborer, an artist's model, and even a coffin polisher. One artist later described him as very straight, slightly shy too beautiful for words, a virtual Adonis. Connery also trained heavily in bodybuilding in the early 1950s. He was also a keen footballer and was offered a chance linked to Manchester United after impressing Matt Busby during a tour match. Connery later said he was tempted, but realized a top footballer could be finished by 30, and he was already 23. So he chose acting instead, and later called it one of his smarter moves. That choice led him toward Bond, but what really set him apart was not just his looks or strength. It was the mix of roughness, charm, and physical confidence that made him believable in danger. Why Connery felt born to play Bond. Once Connery got the role, he still had to become Bond in a way audiences would accept. He was at first reluctant to tie himself to a long-running series, but he knew that if the films worked, his career would change with them. He was right. Between 1962 and 1967, he played Bond in the first 5 Eon films, then came back in 1971 and 1983. All 7 were commercial hits. Connery's Bond later ranked as the 3rd greatest hero in cinema history. But the success was not just because Connery looked the part. Director Terence Young helped shape him. Lois Maxwell, who played Miss Moneypenny, said Young took Sean under his wing. He took him to dinner, showed him how to walk, how to talk, even how to eat. That polishing mattered. Connery brought the physical danger. Young sharpened the style. The result was a Bond who felt cool, sexy, and slightly threatening all at once. After Dr. No opened, Connery was getting thousands of fan letters a week. He became a major sex symbol, and the line, "Bond, James Bond," turned into one of the most famous self-introductions in movie history. Critics later pointed out that Connery's Bond could be harsh and morally questionable, but his charisma made audiences go with him anyway. In weaker hands, Bond might have felt cold. Connery made him look comfortable, witty, and hard to resist. More humor entered the role, but the center stayed the same. He was a killer with charm. He could cheat at games, cut through danger, and still seem in control. That balance became the model for every Bond actor who followed, and it raised the stakes for the second film. Why the sequel mattered so much. After Dr. No made money, United Artists approved a second Bond film quickly. The budget doubled to $2 million, and Sean Connery also got a major boost, receiving $100,000 along with his salary. President John F. Kennedy had named Fleming's novel From Russia, with Love as one of his 10 favorite books in Life magazine, and producers Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman chose it as Bond's follow-up story. For the film, the comma in the title was dropped. That also brought pressure. The team needed to prove that Dr. No was not a lucky break. From Russia with Love had to show that Bond could last. In many ways, it did even more than that. The film had to prove Bond was not a one-film success. It pushed the action further, deepened the suspense, and showed that this series could grow into something much bigger. The film also carries an eerie place in history. It was the last film President Kennedy saw at the White House on November 20th, 1963, just before his assassination. Behind the camera, there were key changes. Production designer Ken Adam left to work on Dr. Strangelove, so Sid Kane took over. Maurice Binder was replaced as title designer by Robert Brownjohn. Stunt coordinator Bob Simmons was unavailable, and Peter Perkins stepped in, though Simmons still performed stunts. John Barry replaced Monty Norman as soundtrack composer. The film also introduced Bond traditions that would become major parts of the series, including a pre-title sequence, a secret gadget from Q Branch, Blofeld's eerie presence, a helicopter sequence, a theme song with lyrics, and the promise in the credits that James Bond would return. The deadly trap at the heart of the story. The plot begins with revenge. Spectre wants Bond dead after the death of Dr. No in Jamaica. Their planner is Kronstein, a Czechoslovak chess grandmaster who creates a trap that looks irresistible. The bait is a Lecter cryptography device from the Soviet consulate in Istanbul. Rosa Klebb, once linked to Soviet counterintelligence, is assigned to supervise the mission, and she chooses Red Grant as the killer who will strike at the right moment. To make the trap work, Tatiana Romanova is pulled in without knowing the full truth. She is a cipher clerk at the consulate and is tricked into believing Klebb is still working for Smersh. In London, Bond is called to meet M and is told that Tatiana wants Bond's help to defect to the West in exchange for the Lector. M suspects a trap, but decides to go ahead anyway, just as Kronstein predicted. Before Bond leaves, Q Branch gives him a special briefcase. It contains defensive gadgets and an AR-7 rifle. In Istanbul, Bond works with Ali Kerim Bey, the head of MI6's local branch, while waiting for Tatiana's next move. At the same time, Grant shadows Bond in secret, protecting him until it is time to kill him himself. Bond and Kerim Bey run into danger quickly. Kerim Bey is attacked by the Soviet agent Krylenko, and after a later attack at a Roma settlement, Bond helps Kerim Bey kill him before he escapes. Eventually, Tatiana comes to Bond's hotel room and agrees to help him steal the Lecter by giving him plans to the consulate. The two spend the night together while Klebb and Grant secretly film them. That detail matters later and makes the whole mission even dirtier, where the mission became truly deadly. Once Bond has the floor plans and MI6 confirms the Lecter description, he and Kerim Bey move quickly. They carry out the theft and leave Istanbul with Tatiana aboard the Orient Express. But the danger does not ease. Kerim Bey and Bond manage to subdue Commissar Benz, a Soviet security officer. Then the trap closes further. While Bond goes back to Tatiana, Grant kills both Kerim Bey and Benz. Bond is furious and starts questioning Tatiana's real motives. When the train reaches Belgrade, Bond tells one of Kerim Bey's sons that his father is dead and gets instructions to meet a British agent named Nash at Zagreb. Grant overhears all of it. He kills Nash and takes his place. At dinner, he drugs Tatiana and overpowers Bond. Then comes a reveal. Grant tells Bond that Tatiana has only been a pawn in Spectre's plan. Bond and Tatiana are both meant to die, with fake blackmail material left behind to shame British intelligence. Bond stays Bond. He tricks Grant into opening Nash's attaché case, which has been booby-trapped, and the two men launch into a brutal compartment fight. Bond finally kills Grant by stabbing him and then garroting him. Taking the Lecter and the film from the hotel night, Bond and Tatiana leave the train in Istria and use Grant's escape route. Even then, they are not safe. Spectre comes after them with helicopter and boat attacks before they finally get clear. Back inside Spectre, the failure brings punishment. Blofeld has Kronstein executed after Bond survives. Klebb is then ordered to recover the Lecter and kill Bond herself. In Venice, disguised as a maid, she sneaks into Bond and Tatiana's hotel room. Tatiana knocks Klebb's gun away, and during the struggle, Bond faces Klebb's venom-tipped shoe blade before Tatiana shoots Klebb dead. Bond then takes a gondola ride with Tatiana and drops the blackmail film into the canal. The villains who changed Bond's world. One of the smartest changes in From Russia with Love came before filming even began. In Ian Fleming's novel, the threat came from SMERSH, a Soviet organization, but the filmmakers did not want the film to lean too hard into direct Cold War politics, so they replaced SMERSH with Spectre. That let the story avoid obvious political tension, while also giving Bond a larger enemy that could keep coming back. It changed the feel of the whole series. Instead of Bond fighting one side in a simple East versus West battle, he was now facing a secret criminal group willing to use both sides for its own gain. The film also introduced Spectre in a strong way. We see Kronstein summoned after a tense chess match, then taken to a yacht where Blofeld appears without ever fully showing his face. All we really get is the white cat, the ring, and the voice. That mystery worked. Blofeld is only known as Number One in the film, and in the end credits the actor is marked with a question mark. Anthony Dawson physically played the role, though he went uncredited, and Blofeld's lines were dubbed by Eric Pohlmann. Rosa Klebb, played by Lotte Lenya, became one of the nastiest Bond villains. Some reviewers at the time disliked her, but later audiences saw her as a classic Bond threat. Wladek Schabal's Kronstein added another layer, all nerves and cold pride. Walter Gotell appeared as Morzeni at the training grounds. The film also made Red Grant far more central than he had first been in the script. Richard Maybaum kept rewriting during production, and Grant was added more deeply into the Istanbul material at the last moment to give more focus to the Spectre side of the story. That choice mattered because Grant's quiet presence helps the whole film feel tense. And once the villains were in place, the next surprise was just as important: the people chosen to bring this world to life. The casting stories behind the faces. The casting is full of odd turns and personal stories. Desmond Llewellyn stepped in because Peter Burton could not return as Major Boothroyd. M introduces the character as being from Q Branch, but the dialogue never actually calls him Boothroyd. Llewellyn would become the Q audiences remembered for decades. Several actresses were considered for Tatiana Romanova before Daniela Bianchi got the role, reportedly Connery's own choice. Bianchi even began taking English classes for the part, but in the end, her lines were dubbed by Barbara Jefford. The famous hotel bed scene where Bond first finds Tatiana was used as Bianchi's screen test, with Anthony Dawson standing in as Bond, and that scene later became a traditional test for Bond actors and Bond girls. Katina Paxinou was considered for Rosa Klebb, but Lotte Lenya got the role after Terence Young heard her music and wanted her energy in the film. Kronstein's role also brought hesitation. Wladek Schabel worried that Bond's growing success might typecast him, but he was persuaded in part by Connery's then-girlfriend, Diane Salento. The two gypsy girls, Vida and Zora, played by Eliza Gur and Martine Beswick, trained for 6 weeks for their fight scene. Martine Beswick was even miscredited as Martin Beswick in the opening titles, though that was later fixed. Then there is Pedro Armendariz, who played Kerim Bey. He was suffering from inoperable cancer during filming. Once production moved from Istanbul to Britain, his scenes were rushed forward so he could finish them. He worked through visible pain, and when he could no longer continue, he went home and took his own life. Remaining shots after he left used a stunt double, and even Terence Young as stand-ins. Joe Robinson had also been considered for Red Grant, but the role went to Robert Shaw. And as if the casting stories were not dramatic enough, the production itself soon became a struggle of its own. One problem after another on set. Filming began on April 1st, 1963 at Pinewood Studios. Because of Armendariz's illness, his scenes were shot first. The story is set largely in Istanbul, and real locations included the Basilica Cistern, Hagia Sophia, and Sirkeci Station, though Pinewood handled much of the work. The MI6 office, Spectre Island, the Venice Hotel, and the train interiors were built or shot there. Even the gypsy camp ended up recreated at Pinewood, so the production could meet British funding rules. The scene with rats had to be filmed in Spain because Britain would not allow filming with wild rats, and white rats painted with cocoa in Turkey did not work. Ian Fleming even visited Istanbul during the shoot and spent a week there. Yet the production kept running into trouble. Berkeley Mather contributed uncredited rewrites while filming was already underway, and editor Peter Hunt began reshaping the movie before all the key footage was even done. Hunt and Young also made a smart change during editing, moving the Red Grant training material to the front of the film, before the main titles. That gave the opening a stronger punch. Then things got more serious. The production fell behind schedule and went over budget. On July 6, 1963, while scouting locations for the boat chase in Scotland, Terence Young's helicopter crashed into the water. He, art director Michael White, and a cameraman survived with minor injuries, and Young still worked the full day. Soon after that, Daniela Bianchi's driver fell asleep on the way to a shoot and crashed the car, leaving her face bruised and delaying scenes for 2 weeks. This was not a smooth production. It was one problem after another. And with so much going wrong behind the scenes, it is even more impressive that the film's action ended up becoming one of its biggest strengths. The action scenes that set the standard. A lot of what people now think of as classic Bond was sharpened here. The helicopter chase and boat chase were not in Fleming's novel. They were added late to make the ending more exciting. The helicopter scene was inspired by the crop duster attack in North by Northwest, and there was even a strange Bond link there because Alfred Hitchcock had reportedly shown interest in directing the sequel after Dr. No. That never happened, but the link is still striking. Terence Young handled the helicopter pursuit as an homage, and Sean Connery did much of it himself. It was dangerous. The helicopter came too close to Connery, and he was nearly killed. Some shots used a radio-controlled miniature helicopter, and the special effects team was nearly arrested while trying to secure a full-sized one near an airbase in Scotland. The boat chase was even more chaotic. The speedboats were not loud enough, so their sounds were replaced later. The sea was rough. A rented camera boat sank in the Bosphorus, and the big explosion filmed in Pinewood went out of control. 3 stuntmen were badly hurt, and Walter Gotell's eyelids were burned. Even so, the sequence made the ending feel bigger. There was also the attaché case from Q Branch, one of the film's most memorable gadgets. It carried a tear gas trap, a folding rifle, a throwing knife, and 50 gold sovereigns. Then there is the Bond-Grant fight on the Orient Express. Terence Young, a former boxer at Cambridge, helped choreograph it with Peter Perkins. The scene took 3 weeks to shoot, and Connery and Shaw performed much of it themselves. It was so realistic that it worried people on set. That fight became one of the most respected hand-to-hand fights in the series. And after the film raised the stakes with its action, it also started shaping the Bond style people would remember for years. The start that changed 007 forever. From Russia with Love also matters because of how it opens. The film starts in a way that feels sharper, stranger, and more confident than before. The gun barrel opening was tighter and more refined than before, even though it used much of the same footage idea as Dr. No. It was more musical, more precise, and felt more like the classic Bond opening people remember. Then came the pre-title scene, where what looks like Bond being stalked and killed in a garden turns out to be a brutal training exercise. That one choice told audiences this world was bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than before. After that came another big change. Robert Brownjohn took over the main titles after Maurice Binder did not return, and his projected credits over Dancing Women started a whole Bond tradition. Brownjohn later said the idea came after his wife stepped in front of a slide projector, though he was also influenced by Moholy-Nagy. Either way, it became one of the most copied parts of Bond style. The film used a lyrical theme, another first for the series, and that richer opening sound pushed Bond into a new level of identity. The film even brings back Sylvia Trench from Dr. No, showing Bond with her before his next mission begins. Young and Maybaum had imagined this as a running joke, with Sylvia appearing at the start of each adventure, only to lose Bond to duty again. That idea did not last, but it shows how early the series still was. The people behind it were still building habits, still testing ideas, and still deciding what a Bond movie should feel like. And once the film had found its style, the next surprise was where so much of that world was actually created. The big location secret behind the film. The film may feel like a trip across Europe, but much of it was built closer to home. Cold War politics made filming behind the Iron Curtain difficult, and British funding rules shaped the production too. To qualify for support, at least 70% of the film had to be shot in Britain or the Commonwealth. That is why so much of the movie was actually created elsewhere. The Gypsy Camp is a perfect example. A real encampment had been found in Topkapi, but the sequence was recreated by Sid Kane on the Pinewood backlot instead. Exterior train work was filmed in Argyll, Scotland, and Switzerland stood in for sections of the journey because the real route could not be used as planned. Even Heatherden Hall and its gardens at Pinewood became Spectre Island. Terence Young stretched the illusion further by reusing the same training area from different angles to make it look larger. There were also strange little production moments that sound like they belong in a different movie. Thousands of people gathered in Istanbul to watch Sean Connery shoot at Sirkeci Station, and the crowds became such a problem that stunt coordinator Peter Perkins had to distract them by dangling himself upside down from a nearby balcony, pretending to be stuck. It worked. Another small role ended up going to production manager Bill Hill after the actor hired to play Nash stepped away. On screen, those details pass quickly. Behind the scenes, they show how much improvising the film needed. The hidden details that still stand out. Some of the oddest details in From Russia with Love are the small ones. They do not change the main story, but they make the film more interesting. One scene nearly ran into censorship trouble in Britain. Bond and Tatiana are watched from behind a one-way mirror, while Rosa Klebb and a Spectre cameraman filmed them. The cameraman was visibly sweating under the lights, and the British Board of Film Classification felt that made the moment seem too voyeuristic. The filmmakers were told to trim the scene to avoid risking a harsher rating, And they did. Then there are the cameos. This movie used the wives of key people in the production. Harry Saltzman's wife, Jacqueline, appears at Belgrade Station. And later, during the Venice gondola scene, the female tourist filming Bond and Tatiana is Dorothea Bennett, the first wife of Terence Young. The film also sneaks in a bit of promotion for another Eon movie. In Fleming's novel, Krylenko comes out from behind a billboard linked to Niagara and Marilyn Monroe. For the film version, Sid Cain changed it to a billboard for Call Me Buana, starring Bob Hope and Anita Ekberg. And Krylenko crawls out through Ekberg's mouth before being shot. Another visual detail came from still photographer David Hearn. When the prop Walther PPK did not arrive, he lent his own Walther LP-53 air pistol for publicity photos with Connery. The barrel was much longer, but those images became so famous that poster artist Renato Frattini used the same look on British posters. Robert Shaw also had to stand on a crate in some scenes with Connery because he was shorter. From Russia with Love was both a critical and commercial success. It earned more than $78 million worldwide from a $2 million budget, far beyond Dr. No, and became a major 1960s hit. It was also the first film in the Bond series to win a BAFTA for Best Cinematography. Over the years, critics and Bond insiders kept returning to it as one of the strongest Bond films. Rotten Tomatoes later praised it as a sharp Cold War thriller with electrifying action scenes. Danny Peary admired its toughness and the way it stayed clear of the gimmicks that later Bond films leaned on. James Berardinelli called it his favorite Bond film. Neil Smith at the BBC said it only got better with age. IGN ranked it among the very best, and the British Film Institute called it one of the high points of the series. Michael G. Wilson said the Bond team always starts out trying to make another From Russia with Love and ends up with another Thunderball. Barbara Broccoli named it her favorite Connery Bond film. Sean Connery himself, Desmond Llewellyn, Timothy Dalton, and Daniel Craig also counted it among their favorites. Albert Broccoli felt this was one of the films that showed Bond at his best. Which detail from this film surprised you the most? And which one do you think most people still have no idea about? And when it comes to Sean Connery's Bond, do you think From Russia with Love was the film that truly made him a legend? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.